Hi everyone, I hope you all safe and healthy with your family and friends. In this video, we are going to learn about 11th Standard Accountancy, Chapter 6, Exercise Sum Number 6, Subsidiary Book 1. From the following information, prepare the necessary subsidiary books for the Nalanda bookstores. So before we are going to enter the given transaction into the respective books, we are going to identify which transaction is to be entered into the which book. Then only you can easily enter the respective transaction into the respective book. Okay, so let's see the first transaction, that is 2017 December 1, bought from Miss Uma Devi on credit 100 pieces of business statistics book at rupees 80 each and 100 pieces of accountancy book at rupees 150 each. What this transaction tells us? This transaction clearly tells us this is the credit purchases transaction. So you are enter this transaction into the purchases book. So in side from the transaction you have to enter PB, which means PB mentioned for purchases book. So you are going to enter this transaction into the purchases book. Then let's see the next transaction, that is December 7, sold to Sridevi and Co on credit. So what this transaction tells us? This transaction clearly tells us this is the credit sales transaction. So when you are where we are going to enter this transaction, you are going to enter this credit sales transaction into the sales book. So here you can write S.B, which means sales book. Okay, then let's see to find the next transaction is to be entered into the which account. Okay, December 10, bought from Subha and Co. What this transaction tells us? This is the credit purchases transaction. They didn't give any word like cash or credit. You have to consider that transaction is the credit transaction. Okay, so what this transaction tells us? This transaction is the credit purchases transaction. So where you are going to enter this transaction? You are going to enter this transaction into the purchases book. So you can write PB on this transaction. PB means purchases book. Let's see to find which this next transaction, that is December 15, returned to Miss Uma Devi 10 copies of damaged accountancy book for which cash is not received. Okay, what this transaction tells us? This transaction clearly tells us this is the returned related transaction. From whom we returned? So we have to find Miss Uma Devi did any other transaction in previous transaction? Yes, on December 1, Uma Devi made credit purchases transaction. Okay, so Uma Devi made credit purchases transaction. So for December 15, Uma Devi returned purchases returned. Okay, purchases returned to Uma Devi. So you have to consider this transaction is the purchases return transaction. How do you find out? Because December 1, Uma Devi made purchases. What kind of purchases? Credit purchases. So here what did Uma Devi do? Here Uma Devi returned. Okay, so this transaction is the purchases return transaction. You can write P or B on this transaction because P or B means purchases return book. Okay, then let's see find the next transaction is going to be entered into the which book. Okay, December 18, sold to Gupta brothers on credit. So what this transaction tells us? This is the credit sales transaction. So you are going to enter this transaction into the sales book. So you can write SB on this transaction. SB means sales book. Okay, the next transaction is on December 26, returned 6 copies of economic books of Subha and Co. So what this transaction tells us? This transaction tells us return related transaction. Okay, from whom or to whom we return this transaction? So Subha and Co. So we have to find in previous transaction Shubha and Co. did any other transaction? Yes, on December 10 bought from Subha and Co. Subha and Co. made purchases transaction. Okay, credit purchases transaction. So you can consider this transaction is the purchases return transaction of Subha and Co. Okay. So you have to write P or B on this transaction. P or B means purchases return book. You are going to enter this transaction into the purchases return book. Okay. How do you find? Because Subha and Co. made purchases, credit purchases on December 10. So here Subha and Co. returned 6 copies of economics book. So this is the purchases return transaction. So you are find which transaction is going to be which account. You identify. Now we are going to open. How many books you are going to open? You are going to open purchases book, sales book, purchases return book. So we are going to open the 3 books. Okay. So before we are going to enter this transaction, we need to prepare the title of the transaction, and we are going to open the 3 books, prepare the format of the 3 books, that is purchases book, sales book and purchases return book. The title of the book is in the books of Nalanda bookstores. The book name is purchases book. The format of the purchases book has 5 columns, that is date, particulars, inward invoice number, LF, amount, details and totals. Then in simultaneously side by side you are going to open sales book and purchases book transaction. Okay, so in second transaction you are going to open the purchases return book. The format of the purchases return book has 6 columns, that is date, particulars, debit note number, LF, amount, detail, total and remarks. Then what is the next book you are going to open? That is sales book. So we prepared the format of the sales book, that is date, particulars, outward invoice number, LF, amount, details, total, rupees. Okay, so we prepared 3 books with format. Okay, now you are going to easily enter the transaction with the respective book. Okay, what the first transaction tells us? The first transaction is the credit purchases transaction. So where you are going to enter this transaction? You are going to enter this transaction into the purchases book. So take the purchases book. Let's see the purchases book dated on 2017 December 1. Miss Uma Devi 100 copies of business statistic books at ₹80 each. So 100 into 80 you will get 8,000 rupees. Enter into the detail column, and then 100 copies of accountancy book at ₹150 each. So 100 into 150 you will get 15,000 rupees is entered into the detail column. Then you have to add these 2 amount and find the total, that is 23,000 you have to enter into the total column. Okay, then you can find if any other purchases transaction is here, credit purchases transaction is here. Yes, on December 1 we enter into the purchases book, and listen, December 10 we have one purchases book related transaction. So what this transaction tells us? Bought from Subha and Co. Bought from Subha and Co means purchases. Okay, purchases account, credit purchases account. So you are going to enter this account, this transaction to the purchases book, that is 40 copies of economic books at ₹80 each, less 15% trade discount, right? So let's go to the purchases book dated on December 10, Subha and Co. The name of the supplier is Subanco. 40 copies of economic books at rupees 80 each. So 40 into 80, what you get? You will get 3,200. Then how much trade discount you received? 15% trade discount. How do you find the trade discount? You have to find from the total value. You have to find the 50% trade discount from the total value. That total value is 3,200 into 15% means 15 into 100. You will cancel 3,200 into 15%. You will get 480 rupees. Okay, so here given less trade discount 15% means you have to deduct it or you have to subtract it 480 rupees from the 3,200. You will get 2,720 rupees. You have to enter this amount into the total column. Then you have to check if any other purchases, repurchases transaction are here. Given here, no. There is only 2 repurchases related transactions are given here. We both the transaction we entered into the purchases book. Okay. Okay. What we do now? We are going to find the total amount of the purchases account, purchases book. So for that you have to add 23,000 plus 2,720. What you get? You will get 25,720. So this is the purchases account at all. So you have to write in purchases book total, you have to write purchases account at all. So you find the purchases book total. Okay, total purchases book value. Then you are going to find purchases return book. Okay, let's see purchases return related transaction. So where is it? Listen here. On December 15, returned to MS Umadevi 10. We already identified which transaction is to be entered into the which book. Okay, so we already written here the name of the books on the transaction. So you just enter the respective transaction into the respective book. Okay, so now we are going to enter the purchases return related transaction into the purchases book. So December 15, returned to Miss Umadevi 10 copies of damaged accountancy book for which cash is not received. What this transaction tells us? This transaction clearly tells us this is the purchases return transaction. So you are going to enter this transaction into the purchases return book. So let's take the purchases return book. We already prepared the format of the purchases return book, dated on 2017 December 15. The customer name is, the supplier name is Miss Umadevi. What are the product? How much rupees? Returns 10 copies of accountancy book at rupees 150 each. So 10 into 150, we have 1,500 rupees. Okay, we get. So that amount you have to enter into the total column. Then you have to find any other, if any other purchase return transactions are here, given here. Yes, on December 26, returned 6 copies of economic books of Suba and Co. So this, what this transaction tells us? This transaction tells us the purchases return transaction. So you are going to enter this transaction into the purchases return book. So let's take the purchases return book dated on December 26. Suba and Co. 6 copies of economic books at rupees 80 each. So 6 into 80, how much you get? You got 480 rupees. Okay. Then you have the trade discount. How much rupees? 15% trade discount. Okay, so you have to cancel that 50%, subtracted that. You have to find the trade discount from the total value 480 from 50%. You will cancel 50% from the 480. You will get 72 rupees. This is the 15% trade discount for the 480 rupees. Okay, Now you have to subtract 72 rupees from the 480 because less 15% trade discount means you have to deducted or subtracted 72 rupees from the 480. You will get 408 rupees. Okay. After subtracted the trade discount, you got how much rupees? 408 rupees. You have to enter this amount into the total column. Then you have to find or you have to check if any other purchases return transactions are here. No, there is only two purchases return transactions are given here. We entered that two transactions into the purchases return book. Okay, now we are going to find the total amount for the from the purchases book. Okay, purchases return book. So for that is 1500 plus 408, you will get 1908. So what you have to write here on purchases return book total is 1908. So you have to write purchases return account debtor rupees 1908 rupees. Okay, then you are going to enter the credit sales transaction into the sales book. Okay, we have two credit sales transactions here. You have to enter these two credit sales transaction to the sales book. Okay, first we take the December 7 sold to Sridevi and Co on credit 240 copies of business statistics at rupees 90 each and 250 copies of accountancy books at rupees 170 each. What this transaction tells us? This transaction tells us credit sales. So you are going to enter this credit sales into the sales book. We already identified and marked here. So we take the sales book, already prepared the format of the sales book. So the dated on 2017 December 7, Sridevi and Co 240 copies of business statistics at rupees 90 each. So 240 into 90, you will get 21,600. You have to enter into the details column, and then 250 copies of accountancy books at rupees 170 each. So 250 into 170, you will get 42,500. Then you have to add this two amount and enter into the total column. So 21,600 plus 42,500, you will get 64,100 rupees. You have to enter this amount into the total column. Then if any other credit sales transactions are here, yes, on December 18 you have one credit sales transaction, that is December 18 sold to Gupta Brothers on credit 200 copies of economic books at rupees 95 each. So what this transaction tells us? This transaction tells us credit sales means we are going to enter this transaction into the sales book. So on sales book on December 18, Gupta Brothers 200 copies of economic books at rupees 95 each. So 95 into 200, how much you get? You will get 19,000 rupees. You directly enter into the total column. So if any other transactions are here, we entered all the given transactions into the respective account, that is purchases book, sales book and purchases return books. Okay, so now we are going to find the total value of the sales book. So for that you have to add 64,100 plus 19,000, you will get 83,100. So for sales book you have to write sales account creditor rupees, the total amount 83,100, which means sundry sales account 83,100 rupees. Okay, so do you have any doubt? Please comment it on the comment box. Thank you. Take care.